Imagine, it's the year 2016. Krashen and Van Patten are headlining IFLT. Ben Slavic is running the war room. T with BVP is blowing up. Comprehensible input wasn't just methodology. It was a movement. The energy, the storytelling, the laughter, the community. The evidence that acquisition works. Those were the glory days of CI, and now it's time to bring them back. Welcome to the CI Renaissance Podcast with your hosts, Sean Lawler and Greg Schwab.
All right, welcome everyone to the first CI Renaissance Podcast. I'm Greg Schwab, and I'm here with my co-host, Sean Lawler. We are both Spanish teachers, and we are here to talk to you about CI, or comprehensible input. How's it going, Sean?
That was a wonderful music intro right there. You're very creative, very emotional. I'm very excited. Yes.
Yeah, I was up all night. I was up all night in the studio mixing that. So yeah, the CI Renaissance. Our goal here is to bring CI back. And what I mean by that is, if you were around as a teacher in 2015, 2016, the CI scene was vibrant. There were two national conferences that everyone was going to, NTPRS and IFLT. There was a lot of excitement, and it seems after the pandemic, a lot of that has died down. There's still a presence of CI teachers at conferences, like regional conferences like Central States Conference that we recently just presented on this past March, but CI is really not the main focus of those conferences. It's just a sidebar. So we're here to bring back, we're Renaissance men, and we're here to bring back the CI enthusiasm.
Yeah, you just describing how things have gone down recently. I guess I came to mind COVID as well. Things really shut down during COVID and haven't come back. When we're talking about these conferences, CI Reboot, I think it's called, with Fluency Matters. They do a summer conference online.
Yeah.
And it's just all this online stuff is different. We have more access to information and stuff, but it's a different experience. And yeah, it's different. And I'm not as connected myself with a lot of people doing CI, but maybe that's a result of just everybody kind of disconnecting. I've had 3 kids since 2015 and very busy with raising them. Greg, you have
Congratulations.
a couple. And
a couple as well, yeah.
Trying to really build, trying to really help people, because it's not just about CI, it's about best practices.
That's true. Why don't we start off because a lot of people might not know, what is comprehensible input? And a bigger question today is, what is it not? So when we talk about comprehensible input, we're referring to Dr. Stephen Krashen's idea. It's one of his 5 hypotheses. And basically, comprehensible input is the idea that we learn languages or acquire languages in only one way, and that's through receiving messages in the language that we understand, right? So
yeah, messages, when we receive messages that we are interested in trying and wanting to know. So when the students wanting to know what the message is, then they will acquire it.
That's where the compelling
way, that's comprehensible. Yeah.
That's where the compelling comes in. But just pure comprehensible, it means you understand the message. That's what it means. So Krashen makes the distinction between acquisition and learning. And the acquisition is like picking up a language. And then the learning is what we've been doing in a lot of classrooms probably for a century, is the verb charts and the analyzing what tense it is and practicing the subjunctive and memorizing acronyms so we can remember how to use the subjunctive. So that is learning, and it has its place, but It
We have
doesn't make
to
sense.
unlearn the learning of the language, to unlearn how to learn a language, something like that, right?
And the way that you,
We have to do.
the way that we learned our first language was through acquisition, right? We didn't sit there as a baby with a verb chart. Another thing that's important is, and that's why I really lean on Dr. Krashen and Dr. Bill Van Patten, is Dr. Bill Van Patten has done studies that kind of, to me, answer any objections to Krashen. And he talks about how uh, learning as an adult and learning as a child are actually the same processes when it comes to what goes on in the brain. Now, the external factors are different, right? Children have a lot more time to just listen to the language. They're also not expected to speak right away. We're also more tolerant of their errors, right? But on the flip side, an advantage of being an adult learner is that most people are already literate in their first language, so they could jump into reading right away. So, but
Yeah.
let's talk about what is like, what would classify as comprehensible input in the classroom and what would be not comprehensible inputs? Because I hear a lot of people throwing out around the phrase that, oh yeah, I teach with CI.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what would we say about that?
Oh my God. You know what? I think a lot of it has to do with talking, that you're actually talking to the students, right? I think if you, if anybody just tries, you put yourself, and let's say you're a Spanish teacher, right? And you put yourself in a classroom of 20, 30 kids, high school kids, whatever, middle school kids, elementary school kids. And you try to talk to those students in Spanish, I think you will figure out a way to be comprehensible, because those students will not understand you unless you are comprehensible, right? So you figure out a way, like a father, a mother figures out ways to communicate with their kids in a way that's comprehensible so that the kid will listen to you. And I guess I say that because this is an innate ability that we all kind of have. If you have the time, the patience, if you have the interest in trying to communicate to somebody, you're going to figure out a way to do that's comprehensible. And so how does that happen? That often happens by like using the visual supports, by slowing down the language, by simplifying things a lot, using a lot of that TPR. So yeah, that's how I would solve it.
It's interesting though, when I started teaching, there was this idea of complete immersion. And there was this idea that you have to talk to the students as if they're native speakers, as if you're talking to a Spaniard in the middle of Madrid, and that they just have to like sink or swim, because everybody knows that you really have to move to the country to learn the language. So we're gonna approach them as if we're in the middle of the Madrid and we're talking to somebody. And some students, there are a very small percentage of students that respond to that. Usually it's the kids that are normally in the honors classes and the AP classes. Now, usually what happens is later on, you find out that they already have some Spanish speaking background, or in other words, they're getting their input from someone else. But I remember that my second year teaching, my first at the current school I teach at, this upcoming year is going to be the 15th year at my current school, the 16th year overall.
Hey.
Thanks.
Yes.
But I remember on my first year at the current school, when we were using the textbook, I was teaching Spanish 3, and I was talking to the kids, as if I would talk to a native speaker. And I had 2 kids that dropped my class like on the first or second day.
Whew.
And we all thought that was actually a good thing, because it was like, okay, if they can't hack it in this class, it means they weren't properly placed, right? They're not willing to put in the work.
Wow.
That kind of thing.
Wow. Yeah. So you just went in hardcore first couple days, just talking to them. This was Spanish 3. And you're just talking to them, the immersive style, the immersive approach.
Immersive approach. Yeah, that was the big thing when I was starting to teach. Even people were saying 100%. target
Mhm.
language use.
Yeah,
Not 90, 100%.
for that, I bet that can work for a student that can really sit still for a really long time and just listen to you and have that really insane ability to focus. But it would have to be then over the span of a few months, right? Or before they could really, you could see that they're acquiring the language, I imagine. And this immersive approach is interesting in the sense of when we used to talk about non-targeting versus targeting language. But yeah, I don't know. This talk about the immersive approach, which is definitely big, because dual language programs are growing, and or at least around the Chicago area over the past 10, 15 years, there's been like, I want to say, an explosion of dual language programs around, especially in the suburbs of Chicago and elementary schools. Um, you know, how is that different than the comprehensible input approach? I think there are some key differences to, or at least some key, being a comprehensible input teacher, you are an immersive teacher, right? I know I've been on use, right? I've used that term. I immerse students in the language just to help these administrators know kind of what it is, what comprehensible input means. But I think as a comprehensible input teacher, you're being immersive in a way that is effective, especially
Right.
with students that you only see 45 minutes, 50 minutes a day, which is just a drop in the bucket for how much time they really need to learn a language.
Yeah, I would say the main difference too is that if you look at the early grades in those dual immersion programs, a lot of what they're doing with the kindergartners, first graders, second graders, or whatever, I bet you it's going to look a lot more like a CI classroom.
Calendar
That
talk at the beginning of the day.
that's the difference. And it's also time. A lot of us high school and middle school teachers, we only have 45 to 90 minutes with the kids, depending on whether you're doing block schedule or every day. But those dual immersion schools, they have usually the morning in English and the evening and the afternoon in Spanish or vice versa. If you look at what the younger grades are doing, there's going to be the principles of comprehensible input, because it doesn't matter what methodology you're using, even if you're using grammar worksheets. If the student understands the message on the grammar worksheet, they've just received comprehensible input, right? So,
Sure.
but the idea of the CI as a methodology or as an approach is to optimize that experience, right?
Yeah.
Anything that's wound up in your Bill Van Patten says, mental representation of the language got there through comprehensible input.
Uh-huh. They got there through comprehensible input.
They got a comprehensible input. But actually, then you could start getting into the whole debate about universal grammar and things like that. But I think that's beyond the scope of our podcast. But they've actually,
yeah, they just took me away. Woo, okay, universal way.
Yeah.
Through my brain in a loop. Yeah, but you know this stuff, Greg, and that's great. I look forward to talking to you more throughout these episodes here. About just all the research and all the terminology and all the knowledge involved in what we know regarding language acquisition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why don't we talk a little bit about, like, how did you get into language teaching, and how did you learn the language yourself?
Okay, real quick, I'll try to do that. I studied Spanish since like middle school, I think, but they were my worst grades in high school. I remember I would get C's and D's. I think they dropped me from Spanish 3 to Spanish 2 one year. I remember I moved from Milwaukee to Madison. I went to a Madison West High School, wonderful public school system there. And like they had to drop me down a grade, down a level. I remember my Spanish 1 teacher, and I went to a Catholic high school in Milwaukee, Pius High School. My freshman year Spanish teacher, he was wonderful. He was like so much fun. I didn't learn any Spanish, but he was so much fun. I was like, talk to us about stuff. He would show us his slideshow about, he was a Peace Corps engineer in Guatemala or someplace like that. I don't know. He really connected with us. And I enjoyed that, but I didn't really learn much Spanish. So I don't think he didn't know about comprehensible, but this was like what, early 90s. So maybe like TPR was around at that time, but Blaine Ray didn't really hit yet. And his TPRS stuff didn't hit yet. So yeah, and then I continued studying Spanish when I went to the university mainly because my older sisters had studied French and went to France to study abroad. I also wanted to study abroad, so I just stuck with it, even though I was still getting like bad grades in Spanish. Getting C's at the university level, in Spanish. I went to Madrid for a year, and that was a wonderful time, wonderful experience. I learned a little bit, like talking about immersion, I found a lot of international students there that spoke English actually. So I was hanging out with them a lot. But then I graduated with a major in Spanish though. I remember coming back from my final semester from after Madrid and was really killing it with my Spanish classes finally. So I was gaining confidence. And then when I graduated from university, I tinkered around with a couple jobs. I worked in the publishing industry and I was doing in Spanish with securing permissions for different textbooks. I'd have to call people in Spain and stuff and talk to them. And then I became a teacher. I originally became an English teacher, teach English classes at the high school level, but struggled and found it really hard. And so I lost a job after my first year teaching, and I really started to think about becoming a Spanish teacher at that point because I was really interested in this bilingualism and these kind of dual language things that were happening in schools. And so I tried to get involved in that. And I eventually, over some years of sort of teaching Spanish and English together, I sort of moved all the way over to Spanish, starting on the south side of Chicago at Wendell Phillips High School. I was using a textbook, but I was trying to make it fun. And a year or two after that, I went to a conference, a one-day seminar with Carol Gabb. And that's where I really started to learn about the comprehensive input approach and tried to get involved more. A year or two later, I went to IFLT. I met Ben Slavic. I joined his blog, and that's where it really blew up for me. I really started
Nice.
and understand how to make it happen in the classroom.
What year was that you went to the Carol Gabb conference?
Yes, that would have been, oh my God, 2012, I think.
2012. Okay.
Over 2011.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So
it was a one-day conference. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
I bought her curriculum. It was there's a wolf on it to try to use in my classrooms. And I tried to follow that script in her curriculum way too much. And I was going over students' heads way too much. It's trying to be more immersive, right? Without really applying the comprehensible input techniques that we really need to have, that comes from you as the teacher, you are the deliverer of the language more so than any texts that is given to you. That's what I think really motivates me as a teacher, knowing that what we create with students in the moment in the classroom is what's gold. It's where the learning really happens, where the language acquisition really happens, versus trying to use some sort of text that's already been made by somebody else.
Right. I think that, both of us use Ben Slavic's STAR approach, so we're definitely drinking the Ben Slavic Kool-Aid. I've been using Ben Slavic's method since 2017. And I use it for high school students. I also use it to teach adult students online. And it works. Number one, it works. Number two, people enjoy it. And I enjoy it too. That's another key, is that the students enjoy it and I enjoy it.
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, it's, I cannot imagine just coming to class every day, okay, here's what we're going to read today. Oh my God. That's just, and versus what we experience when we create these stories together, it's just totally different feel. You enjoy it so much more.
Yeah. I do some movie talks still, kind of when we need a break from the stories, and I teach one CI novel per semester. Really, I mean, I would just like to do stories all the time, but the human mind craves novelty, and especially the teenage mind. So really we take a break from the storytelling and do something else. And then
Yeah,
get them.
you say it's a break, right? To do a movie talk. I find it so much work to like put a movie talk together and make it compelling, or use some other text. Like, yes, when you can get students to a place where like we can just read some of these some of the not little novellas out loud together. Okay, that's great. That's like a great break. We can just read them. Like we can talk about what we're reading. Um, yeah, but otherwise, whew, there's a lot of work trying to put together exercises or activities.
That's true. I for movie talks, I use the book Look I Can Movie Talk, which is put out by TPRS Books. That's really the best one that I've found. But yeah, there's also ways to do non-targeted movie talks as well. But really, for me, I like the one-word image stories and the student created images stories, and definitely we can get into that in a next one of our upcoming episodes, because that's a whole topic all to itself. But that falls under the umbrella of the STAR approach by Ben Slavic, who taught French for 40 years, and I think he wrote like 3 books on TPRS. He says that it took him writing 3 books on TPRS to figure out that TPRS didn't really work for him.
Yeah.
And then he created the method that was originally called the Invisibles, and now it's called the STAR approach. And now he's got also a square approach, and that's more for like middle school, and then the circle approach is for elementary. He just put out that book. I purchased it at the end of this school year, and I'm hoping to tackle it over the summer, but I have not gotten into that book yet. But
what's a book that has no angles? It's not the triangle, it's not the square, it's the circle.
Yeah.
That's crazy, man. I don't know if I can.
Yeah. So yeah, for me, I originally, I went to a Catholic school for high school, and I actually didn't take Spanish. I took Latin for 2 years, and just like you, the teacher was a really fun teacher, but I really didn't learn anything. It was very much, declensions, and I don't know, do they call them conjugations in Latin? But yeah. And then
like you're breaking apart language, declension.
Right. Declension. Yeah. Cause Latin, the ending of the noun changes according to, what part of speech it is. Yeah.
That's the language declining on you, the declensions.
Yeah. So yeah. And then, I did like a little study abroad program in Spain, where
Did you
I
have any
also
Spanish? Did you have any Spanish background before?
I didn't. Yeah, it was kind of like a study abroad program where I also taught English. So I really learned Spanish through immersion. In Madrid, I spoke with the Theta and everything, and then when I came back to Chicago and I had a job at an answering service, my speaking with the Theta didn't really work out when I was speaking to the Mexican and Puerto Rican and Cuban callers, that we were our clients. It just seemed very contrived. It's funny that I actually, for the first like 2 months that I worked there, when I spoke to a Spanish speaking caller, I would accidentally say euros instead of dólares, and they would be like, what's going on? So yeah, then I majored in Spanish at Northeastern Illinois University. And I actually, and this is interesting, so I never studied grammar. This is really interesting. Like, I've never studied Spanish grammar. Like, even when I was in Spain, I just had one of those Berlitz books, and sometimes, I might look up a little bit of grammar, like, oh, how do you say this verb in this tense or whatever, but never any training about preterite or imperfect or pori para. And so I actually took what's called the CLEP test after my experience in Spain, and they gave me like 16 credit hours of university credit based on my knowledge in Spanish. And that was not having ever studied it in high school or studying any grammar. Then I went to a community college in Chicago. And when I was ready to transfer over to Northeastern, I spoke to the department chair, and he placed me right into 300 level courses. And again, I'm in a 300 level course, and we're reading like Spanish literature. And I still don't know what a stem changing verb is, but I could use it. you know? And this experience, I ended up taking all the 300 level courses, and then I found out that actually they didn't have any 300 level courses left, and I had to take some 200 level courses. And it's interesting that the 200 level courses also did not teach grammar, except there was one course that taught like the accent, the rules for accentuation in Spanish.
Yeah.
You know, like palabras esdrújulas, palabras agudas, and stuff like that. That was it. That was the extent of the grammar knowledge. Okay. So it wasn't until student teaching when I got placed into it was Chicago Public School, Amundsen High School.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, and then for my student teaching, they placed me actually in a Catholic elementary school. It was like a K through 8 thing. It was at that point that I had to start learning the grammar explanations that were in the textbook, so then the next day I could teach them to students. Look, because up until that point, I really just I knew like how it sounds, and
Yeah.
I knew how to write papers, right? Because my professors would, they would make corrections here and there on my paper, but it was not like this like memorization of the boot verbs and all that kind of stuff.
You never went through that kind of education. Okay.
No. Yeah. So that's the interesting thing, is that you can get to 300 level in the university system, and you could not explain the rules for preterite and imperfect or a boot verb or any of that kind of stuff. Right. And at that point, I also had taken the OPI exam. Right. So I mean, it's like, it really blew my mind that I was like
crazy. It is crazy how much emphasis we foreign language teachers place on knowing like parts of speech and these grammar components. I mean, as an English, like somebody who majored in English, for example, or even taught English, like I spent, I don't know, this 5-6 different years in one capacity or another teaching English literature at the high school and middle school level. Like, we just don't get into grammar like that, so why are we doing that in the foreign language field if we're not even doing that?
If I'm not mistaken, they also do that in the ESL field though too, right?
Oh my God, I do teach ESL now. This is my first year teaching ESL, and I mean, I explain things when pop-up grammar type of scenarios are relevant, and but I don't use any kind of curriculum. So like Chicago Public Schools apparently has some sort of like ESL framework from level year 1, 2 to 3 in high school, but I've looked at that framework and it's just hogwash, and my English language English language program director, every school in Chicago Public. Are you still there, Greg?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Because like your screen was all crazy for a second. Anyways.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Every school in Chicago Public Schools has these English language program directors now. So like my ELPT person told me a few months ago that the CPS is changing their framework completely. So hopefully they're going to be more with their standards, like they're going to be a little more like ACTFL, looking a lot more like ACTFL than they are like Common Core, which is what they are right now. So yeah, is there a curriculum out there? It's hogwash. Whatever CPS provides is definitely hogwash. I know there's textbooks out there and stuff, I imagine, but I haven't found one, nor have I been really interested in finding one. Because I know how language is learned, and I use the same approach, this comprehensible input approach, for the beginner levels, right? It's till we get to like that intermediate level where we can really read and explore other ways in which to get more input that's comprehensible and also compelling. Like I use for that novice level, for those novice level kids that I have in actually all 3 of my ESL level classes, I have novice level kids, but maybe we can figure that out at my school. Maybe we can get them leveled better over the span of, but I need to be there for a while because they didn't really have an ESL teacher before. So hopefully, like I imagine ESL 1, like same thing I do with my Spanish classes, right? ESL 2, basically the same thing, right? And ESL 3, maybe we're exploring more like informal debates kind of thing where I'm getting them
Yeah.
to output a little bit more, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I think ESL is a little bit different though, because I mean, theoretically, they are getting inputs just out in the world.
Yes. And they
Right.
are.
And in their other classes. I mean, that could differ among students though, because obviously, in Chicago, there's a lot of neighborhoods, where everything is in Spanish and,
Yes,
so
and they live on the Southwest side. That's where I teach, right? And it's very easy to get just swept away in the Spanish speaking community and never learn English. I've had students, I used to teach in Rogers Park for 9 years before moving to the school on the Southwest side. And I've had students that came in sophomore year. I remember these two sisters coming in sophomore, freshman year, and we didn't have an ESL program for them at the small school I taught at, but for some reason they really wanted to stay at our school, even though we didn't have like ESL classes for them. And they, unfortunately, right, they graduated really not learning any English. And I think they were working at Jewel, both of them, for a little while in the back, where they didn't really use language, or whoever they were speaking with, they were speaking in Spanish, right? I don't know if they're ever going to learn English.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think a common misconception that some teachers have about CI is, right, all you guys are doing is stories all the time. But, I think we have to preface it with, we're really talking about novice low to like, intermediate mid. Like once the students actually get to an intermediate mid, intermediate high level, then right, we can do other things other than storytelling, right? But the majority of the students, right, are like, if we could get them to an intermediate high by the time they leave high school, that's pretty good. Because according to Crash and intermediate, the intermediate level is the level at which you can then, like, you can go to Mexico, you can go to Spain, and you could be a self-learner, right? Because if you go before you're at an intermediate level, it's just noise, right? You drop yourself down in the middle of Madrid, try to immerse yourself, and then you just get overwhelmed because everybody speaks too fast, and why do they speak with a lisp and all this kind of stuff. And then you seek out your your American friends,
Yeah, right.
and English speaking friends in Madrid, and you just hang out with them, and then you don't learn anything.
For sure. And so I think like what we're interested here in with this podcast, and what we're interested, both you and I, Greg, in doing, when we presented at that conference, the Central States Conference in Chicago a couple months ago, and when we get together with our TCI Chicagoland group a couple times a year, what we're really interested in doing is really helping foreign language teachers, ourselves included. We're still on the trajectory of learning. There's, trying to make this job easier and more effective constantly, but also helping teachers who are newer to this approach to teach those groups of students that are at the novice level, novice to intermediate mid. Because yes, like we have a history, our field has a history of not really reaching those students. And yeah, but that doesn't have to be the case.
Right. And if the old methodology really worked, why is bilingualism so low among like native born American citizens, right? Because I mean, I get all the time, like, people are surprised that I speak Spanish, but if I went to Western Europe, people would be surprised that I only speak 2 languages, right? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like what, and obviously there are, right, if you're living in another country, then there are like more economic incentives for learning English, let's say. And also in Western Europe, I mean, the countries, I think Spain is like the size of like Arizona or something. So, you just go like, a few hundred miles and you're in another country, right? So there is that motivation for learning languages. But in general, like our education system has not produced results in making bilingual speakers, you know. So if the old methodology really worked, then, you know, we would be everybody in the United States would either speak Spanish or French, right? Because those are the languages that pretty much everybody takes in high school.
I mean, the old methodology, they were still working with a limited time frame, just like we do. You know, if you're teaching high school, if you're teaching middle school foreign language classes, you have such a limited amount of time. You know, whereas these like countries in Europe, there's ways in which these kids get immersed in a foreign language. I mean, and then there's also the issue of like English and mainstream culture and being exposed to all that around the world. But yeah, we just have such little time. What is it, like 500 hours in high school? If you take a foreign language class all 4 years, it's 500 hours.
500. I actually calculated it out based on the number of classes per year times 4, and yeah, it's 500 hours, and that's if a student takes 4 years of the language.
Yeah.
That's if they're not absent. That's if they don't get called out for sports.
Right.
You know, that's if their parents don't call them out for club sports, right? Which is also a thing. You know,
500 hours, and you know, the old way of doing it is trying, I don't know, I guess they're trying to like cram. I don't know who created these textbooks, right? But they're trying to cram stuff in. Maybe they're thinking that way, but it doesn't work, right? So, I mean, cramming in grammar versus really just going super slow.
I think what Krashen said though is that the problem is that people who tend to be interested in grammar are the people who gravitate towards being a language teacher.
Yeah. That was not me. Oh my God.
Yeah, not me either. Yeah.
Maybe that's why we are where we're at. And I think there's so much influence in our field by teachers who don't teach novice level classes. They'll teach like the advanced level classes, or they'll teach like heritage classes, right? Or they'll be in immersive programs, like, whereas there's the need is to help teachers who are teaching novice level learners, first and second year. I mean, every school in this country, every student needs to take, I think it's everywhere in this country, 2 years of a foreign language. And that's mostly what just students take. They just take year 1 and year 2. And we need to help these foreign language teachers know how to teach level 1 and level 2. So we can make something.
Well, yeah. And with all these talks about, like, you know, programs being cut and everything, I mean, if we don't start showing that we're producing results, we're in, you know, our classes are an endangered species, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, I feel for those language teachers that teach other languages like Japanese or Chinese or French or something, where it's difficult for the schools to find these teachers. And if those teachers don't get students enrolled in their classes, then their classes get cut, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of what we've seen in the Chicagoland area with a lot of Chinese. I mean, Chinese classes, Mandarin, that used, like, maybe 10 years ago, that was the thing, you know, like, to be cutting edge was to have a Mandarin class in the school. But the only Mandarin teachers that I run into nowadays that their program is still going are the ones that are into CI. And I don't know if that's just, you know, anecdotal, it's just a coincidence, but I've just, the only teachers that I've run into, you know, at conferences that are still teaching Chinese are the CI Chinese teachers.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
right. Yeah.
But yeah, so back to, you know, my story of how I got into CI. Now, you know, Scott Benedict actually interviewed me on his podcast, and we took a whole hour, but so I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version. Is that
give us the Cliff Notes.
I was assigned to teach a class that was for like struggling learners, you know, like how every school, you know, many schools have like 3 tracks. You have like the regular track and the honors track, but then you have a track that's like, some schools call it studies. We call it college prep, you know, because we call it college prep, upper college prep, and then honors. You know, some schools have a different title for it. But the lowest track is usually like for the struggling learners. So we had this track that was only a 2-year track because the idea was, well, these kids just for some reason they can't learn language, so we're just going to get them their requirement and move on, uh and the way that the differentiation would work was we would just do the Spanish 1 textbook over 2 years. That's it. That was the differentiation. And so really what
the
you
amount
had,
of torture.
yeah, really what you had in the class was you kind of had like maybe a third of the kids had some kind of, learning struggles, learning differences really that, they really could benefit from like a slower pace. And then a third of the kids really were just kind of there for behavioral problems. And then the other third of kids were kids whose parents, maybe they figured out that the GPA points are worth the same as the regular class.
Okay.
So, but what happened was the kids with the behavioral issues really kind of dominated the class, and just made it really unpleasant, let's say.
Oh.
So I really got to like Christmas break and I was like, I don't know how I can do this. I don't know how I could survive a whole year, of this. Like I was just, yeah. And so I just started searching things on YouTube about like different ways of teaching language.
Okay.
And I came across Dr. Stephen Krashen. He has a lecture. He gave a lecture. I think it was in Korea. It's called Pagoda Academy or something. But again, very simple presentation. He only had a whiteboard and a marker. And he explained the theory of comprehensible input, the acquisition and learning distinction, and all of that. And I watched all of his videos that I could get my hands on. But then I was like, okay, so I'm convinced of this. Like, what do I do? So I Googled around and I found Dr. Krashen's email. It wasn't that hard to find, and it was like a Hotmail address. And I sent him an email about my predicament, and he said, get yourself to a Blaine Ray conference, So I Googled Blaine Ray, and I think it was 2015. I went to the Blaine Ray like 3-day conference, and Blaine was teaching German. And I think it was after 2 days, he did a timed write. And I was able to write something like 30 words in German, like sentences, but 30 words, complete sentences in German.
And how many minutes?
In like 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's usually what Blaine used to do at his conferences, was give a demo in a language that maybe the teachers that are in attendance at the conference don't present. So,
yeah.
So I was like, okay, I like this method, but, what do I do in the classroom? And I remember Haiyun Liu, she's a Chinese teacher. Yeah, she's a Chinese teacher up in Wisconsin. And she teaches with CI. And she told me, you know what, just write stories based on the textbook you're using. So what I did then was, when I got back to the classroom, I did movie talks, and I actually wrote a whole like mini novel based on the vocabulary words from the Descubre textbook series.
Descubre.
Yeah, that's what we were using. So that's the way that I was like, okay, well, I'm teaching the textbook, so I was checking that box. But then, so it wasn't really TPRS, but it was kind of like reading. It was like movie talks combined with reading a novel. But I'll tell you, my students, they liked it a lot more. And then one of my colleagues who went with me to that conference, she started experimenting with TPRS. And the daughter of the assistant principal at the time was in that class. And so her daughter used to hate Spanish, but then with the TPRS, she was like, she actually reported thinking in Spanish at home, which is interesting, because Krashen has this thing about the din in the head hypothesis, where when you receive a lot of comprehensible input, it just kind of goes like, you hear like phrases in your head. So yeah, then at that point, the administration was like, well, we want more of this. What can we do to promote this? And then I became department chair. And then, but I never really did TPRS. I tried it. I tried the 3 locations thing. And
you spent 3 days with Blaine Ray, you said, right?
Yeah, I think it was either a 2 or 3 day conference, like,
It was 3-day conference with
at
Blaine
the
Ray.
Holiday Inn.
And right. And so how how many hours in the day were you with Blaine Ray in his particular workshop?
I think it was like it was probably like an 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. type deal.
Just with Blaine Ray?
Yeah. At that conference, it was just Blaine. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then I went to other conferences in later years, and it was Mike Coxon was the presenter.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah,
So
Mike
then
Coxon.
after 2 days of this with Blaine Ray, you were like, hey, this is great. I'm going to try to do this. But then you
Well,
didn't
it
get
wasn't like I was going to try to do it. It was like I had to. I had to.
your-
Like
you
once
didn't-
once
you're losing
once
it.
you see it, once you
You're
see it,
rooting
you
for
can't
your kids,
unsee it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you were
Yeah.
cutting out there. The audio was cutting out.
My bad. I don't think
yeah.
we can tackle each other so well, but yeah. So then you didn't really try his method or the TPRS method necessarily in your classroom. Is that correct?
I did movie talks, and I did a few stories with the 3 locations, but they didn't really work. So I was just really basically writing stories based on the Descubray textbook. So
Yeah. Yeah, I observed Ray Bauer a few years back at his middle school in Western Springs. And I remember him doing this. It was very TPRS-like, but he was very non-targeted about it, where, okay, class, we're going to come up with a character. Now we're going to come up with 3 activities that character did over the weekend. And then he spent a little bit of time fleshing out what the character mowed the lawn, with who did he mow the lawn, maybe how long. And he feels that if it's going somewhere, he keeps going with it. If it's not going somewhere, then he changes to the next activity. Oh, the second activity that the kid did over the weekend or the character did over the weekend, play volleyball, with who do they play volleyball? And so I've done that a little bit in Ray Bauer style, just making it very non-targeted. And I feel like that's worked, but I love this idea of like that Blaine Ray's come up with that I think also follows. This is just me thinking, but I think it really follows what you see happening in children's books for little kids, where there's like the repetition 3 times of a character tries things 3 times. I mean, think of the 3 Little Pigs. Oh my God, there's something great. There's something about the repeating a similar story 3 times, but getting sort of a different result at the end. There's a lot of value in that, repeating that language, but also making it compelling. I see that happening there.
yeah, I think with TPRS though is that I think that it works for certain teachers and others it doesn't work for. I think you really have to have some kind of. I mean, I really kind of believe in I believe in growth mindset and that anybody can really learn anything. But I think with TPRS you really have to have the personality and the talent for it.
Oh yeah. Is there like there's more like being an entertainer involved in it?
Yeah, there's more of that. I feel like there's more of the aspect of being the entertainer, which is why I switched to Ben Slavic's method. In 2017, I went to NTPRS, and it's funny that I think I finally started to understand how to do a TPRS story. And then a few weeks later, Ben Slavic came to Walcott School in Chicago with his conference about the Invisibles. And the only reason I went was that there was like money left over in this professional development fund that we get at my school. And I figured, well, this would be a cool thing to go to. I think it was only like $100 or something for a 3-day conference.
Yeah.
And Ben's method just blew my, and I remember you were there. That blew my mind. And then I was like, okay, I'm going with this, forget about the TPRS. I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And, and I haven't looked back ever since. And I tell you that Invisibles method, he calls it the star approach. It's like magic. It really is just magic. And Um,
He's combed through that with a fine-tooth comb for years and years and years. And it's just, if you say it's magic, it's been a lot of trial and error with him, and a lot of collaboration with a lot of people.
that's the benefit with Ben, is that I think a lot of the CI I don't know if I want to say a lot of them, but some of the CI presenters, they start off teaching with CI, they have teaching jobs, but then they leave their jobs and then they go work full time for the CI company. And then they don't, I feel like they don't really remain engaged with teachers in the classroom. Ben Slavic has always had some kind of online forum where people would give him feedback about what works and what doesn't work in his method, and then he revises it. Somebody comes up with something like, hey, in the problem part of the story, it works well if you do this, and then he'll add it into his next book. He'll give the person credit that they came up with the idea.
Greg, it was even a little bit more than that. It was more like back in 2015 to 2018 or something, 2019, before his blog, he shut down his blog. Maybe it was started in 2013. A couple of years before I jumped in, I think it was going for several years. It was more like, it wasn't so much where like Ben was asking other people to try his ideas. It was more like they were creating it together.
That's true. That's true.
Very, very, very influential, like hardworking, influential people on that blog, like Michelle Whaley just comes to mind. So many people involved. What's that German teacher's name in California? That guy, oh my God, he was like a theology teacher as well. Anyways.
Oh, Robert. I know his name is Robert. I forgot his last name.
Oh my God, his input was always so valuable, and so like creating it, they were like creating it together, trying to like, oh wow, you were doing this. Oh wow, let's try that. Let's make it work. Let's try to like, how can we create what's working well? How can we were communicating to the group what was working well based on what we were trying, based on what we were hearing from our peers on that blog, and then we would like reflect upon it, and we would get input from other people about our questions, to like probing questions and probing comments and stuff, and we would just continually tweak it. And some people would also be working on the same thing, but Ben, I think, like more than anybody else, right, was really like interested in creating a whole curriculum out of all this work that was being developed, and from all of his experience in the past with Blaine Ray and Susan Gross, right? And all
That's
these
right.
people. So he is I think he was a workaholic without really like ever complaining about like, he never complained. It was like a passion of his, like I think he spent a lot of hours at nights, like sleeplessly, like working on this stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah. And the funny thing about Ben is that he, whatever his current book is, he always thinks like the ones he wrote before are just like, that's trash, or whatever, but they're all genius. I mean, even the TPRS in a Year, that's a great book. Like one of his first books, TPRS in a Year, it's an amazing book. I mean, they're all just pure gold, all of them.
Yeah.
So if you get one thing from this podcast, go and Ben is not paying us to say this, but go buy all of his books. That's the best thing you can do for your career. If you want to do PD, buy Ben Slavic's books. And I think he has videos on YouTube too. So
I really appreciate, some people don't like this about his style, but I really appreciate his like stream of consciousness type of way of writing.
It's true.
I don't know. Because it's hard if you're not observing a teacher, and like being a student teacher kind of experience where you're sitting in the classroom observing and then being able to powwow with the teacher afterwards. It's hard to really learn this kind of stuff. But like with like Ben's books, with his kind of stream of consciousness approach, like you kind of follow his thinking, you really get your whole self into the ideas that he's writing about. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's mostly his blog posts. I mean, his books are a lot different.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I mean, I'm hoping to get Ben on this podcast. Really, our goal is to really provide some PD for your commute to and from school. Kind of like, BVP. I used to binge listen to that on my commutes. I think I've listened to Tea with BVP and Talking L2 with BVP, like maybe all of the episodes like 3 times or something.
Oh, no kidding. All of them. Yeah. That's great. I listened to a number of
So
so I mean, what an authority on our field, right? Like you can tell people like, well, BVP said this. He's like, he's the one leading the fields in the research of second language acquisition. And that one phrase, the one phrase that really sticks to me from him is about practice does not make perfect. That's a good one. It's a good talk.
Yeah, he's retired now from academia, and I think he's writing like fiction novels or something. So he doesn't really do as much as he used to. So really, the new generation, we gotta take the reins, and we gotta bring back the CI Renaissance. I'm starting to hear the music, so thanks for listening.
This has been the CI Renaissance Podcast with Sean Lawler and Greg Schwab, bringing the enthusiasm back to CI instruction. If you have a question, an idea for a future episode, or just want to connect with us, visit us at thecirenaissance.com or email us at thecirenaissance@gmail.com. See you next time. And remember, let the Renaissance begin.